Okay, welcome back, lads. I'm doing a video this evening about a topic that I was a bit hesitant to talk about, actually, and the topic is boundaries. And the reason I was hesitant to talk about boundaries is because, I don't really like that word, and the reason is because I think, to a large extent, it's entered into pop psychology and it's been weaponized a bit. It's a bit of a buzzword, but I do think it's an important topic for relationships in general and us as men in relationships. So I want to talk about it. I want to give you some mental models about how to think about boundaries. I want to tell you what they are, how to put them in place, how to stand by them. And I also want to leave you with a personal story about boundaries, which is real cringe. Cringe AF, I would venture to say. So stick around for that. So a mental model about boundaries. So I want you to imagine that you're an artist. You sketch, right? And you open up your sketchbook to a fresh page. It's a blank page. Now you're just looking at white. Okay, there's nothing there. It's only when you when you pick up the pen and you begin to put lines on the page, form shapes, right? These lines we can think of them as boundaries, right? It's only when you start to put these on the page and they come together into a coherent structure that you actually have a work of art, right? If you don't have these lines, there's nothing there to interact with. And so you can think of these lines as what forms you, who you are, and your sense of self, which you need to have a good grasp on, especially if you're in a relationship with a woman. These lines, they are going to include things which are hard no's for you, things that you're not willing to accept. And it's important to have these because just like in the same way that a blank page, there's nothing there. If you don't have these lines, these boundaries in a relationship, it's like there's nobody in the relationship. Your presence isn't there. And if you don't have presence, that's something that you're depriving your woman of, because she wants to feel your presence, because that's what is going to make her feel safe and secure in the relationship, when she feels your presence. And part of maintaining presence is upholding these boundaries, standards for yourself that you're not willing to let slip. Another way to think of boundaries is, so you may have heard this, people say this: nobody will be able to love you if you don't first love yourself. And whenever I heard this, I thought that was woo-woo, kind of new age BS, but I've given it some more thought just recently, and I think there's something to it. And what I would want to do is I want to change the wording slightly, particularly for when I'm talking to men, and I would change it to this: nobody will be able to respect you unless you respect yourself. What does self-respect look like? I've used this idea before in the previous videos about stepping outside of our subjective experience and looking at it more objectively. Now, I want you to imagine stepping outside of your subjective experience and looking at yourself as if you were someone that you were charged with caring for, someone that you respect and love. Now, look at the way that that person is being treated by his wife or girlfriend, by his family, by his friends, by his work colleagues, or whoever it is. Would you be willing to accept the behavior that he's receiving if you loved and cared about this person? And if you wouldn't, why are you accepting these behaviors for yourself? That's something to think about. What are boundaries? Boundaries are these standards, these hard nose, these lines that we're not willing to accept, and they form who we are, and they help form our presence, right? They help form our sense of self. So boundaries are not about controlling someone else. A boundary isn't a stick to beat over the head of your partner. They're about defining who you are, your presence, your sense of self, and what you are willing to accept. The pop psychology has kind of turned it into a buzzword, and I touched on this earlier. And I think it's become a weaponized thing, like weaponized boundaries, where you say like, oh, that's a hard line, you cross my boundary, end of discussion, I'm out of here, right? That's manipulative, that's weaponizing. It's not about punishing other people, it's about upholding your standards and maintaining your sense of self, right? So, enforcing boundaries. The key to enforcing boundaries is not just setting them, although setting them is important, being upfront about your boundaries and early on in a relationship, but also maintaining them, right? So if you tell your girl that something is for you unacceptable, and then she crosses that line, but you stay around without even a discussion about it, you've shown her that your words don't mean anything. And that is a big deal for her, because if she can't trust you to stand by your word, that is going to make her feel unsafe, because how can she trust you if you don't uphold your word? If you are not willing to enforce these boundaries with her, how can you be a man who is going out there in the world, dedicated to his mission, making things happen? Because you're going to meet opposition out in the world. You're going to meet people who are not going to treat you in the best way, and you need to be able to uphold your boundaries with them. And if you can't do it with her, how can she trust that you can do it with other people? Boundaries aren't threats, they're not a weapon, they're standards. They need to be upheld. You must be willing to walk away rather than tolerate behavior that contradicts your values. As the late great Patrice O'Neill said, if you are willing to righteously walk, they will righteously stay. The art of boundaries. So your woman needs to feel your presence. Um, she she needs to feel your presence, and that means having defined boundaries. So just like with the analogy of the artist in the canvas, the canvas begins as blank, and then lines and structure are added, and and then these boundaries begin to define the work of art, and your boundaries begin to define who you are as a man, and a man in a relationship with a woman. Without these boundaries, there's no clear identity, no presence in the relationship to connect with. And boundaries create the framework which within grow respect, attraction, security, and love. And when you fail to set and uphold these boundaries, you're not just allowing disrespect to you, you're erasing yourself from the relationship. You're becoming that blank canvas. You're rubbing out those lines. And if you accept behaviors that go against your values, you communicate that your presence is weak. And a woman is unable to feel secure with a man with a weak presence. She needs to feel your presence to make her feel safe. A man with no boundaries is just like a shapeless piece of clay on the spinning wheel. There's nothing there to appreciate, admire, or engage with. Something about enforcing boundaries, right? I mentioned earlier about the weaponization of boundaries and reacting to them in a defensive way, like, your woman does this thing that crosses a boundary, whatever it might be, and then you immediately shut down and tell her that you're out of here. That's weaponization. It's going to require some communication, right? I'm not saying it requires compromise necessarily, but it certainly needs to be voiced, and you need to explain to her how she crossed the boundary, and why you're not willing to accept it. That gives her the chance to react to it. Don't be scared that it's going to frighten a woman away, because one of two things will happen. The woman is going to respect your boundaries, and she's going to respect you for upholding them, because she's going to feel your presence, feel a strong masculine presence in the relationship with her. Or it is going to be something that makes her walk away. And in that case, that wasn't the right woman for you, as hard as that may be to accept. But it's better to uphold those boundaries and have her walk away than remain in a relationship that requires you to keep rubbing out those lines until you go back to the blank canvas. Because that is going to leave you in a place, one, she's going to leave you eventually, right? Because there's nobody there to interact with, no presence, no security, no admiration. And that's going to require you to build yourself back up. And that is a lengthy and painstaking process. So it's better simply to uphold the structure while it's there. So, story time, boys. I want to tell you about my story, which makes me feel weird talking about. But so, this is a story about boundaries. I had this girlfriend in university, right? We were on the same course, and we met in the first year. By the second year, we'd moved in together. And, after that we graduated, we were both kind of in a space in our lives where we were working out what we were going to do next. And really, I was stagnating. I was working like 24 hours a week, stacking shelves. And in my spare time, I was not doing anything to progress myself, which must have been extremely unattractive. But she hung in there for a while. But anyway, one day she came home from the gym, right? And she came in all excited, like all kind of animated. And she was like, "Oh, when I was leaving the gym, I bumped into this guy and he had a camera. He was a photographer. And he said he liked the way I looked. I had a presence about me and he wanted to take my picture." Um, and I was like, "Oh, okay. Okay. All right." Now, um, I think if we're being honest, lads, if we're keeping it a book, there is something in a man's gut that kind of twists a little bit when another man expresses some kind of interest in his girlfriend, right? But I was a well trained, well conditioned modern man, so I pressed down that feeling of kind of like that gut feeling of jealousy and insecurity. And I was like, "Oh, babe, that's so cool! Wow, yeah." So that, and then she showed me the pictures, like, "Oh, yeah, wow, that's great. You look great. What a great picture." And then she was like, I think I'm really interested in pursuing this as a thing, modeling. And so, I did the right thing. I was supportive and I was like, yeah, yeah, that sounds great, babe. Yeah. So, and to be fair to her, she pursued this with a passion. She pursued it with vigor, right? While I was stagnating, uh, and she started to, reach out to other photographers and she started to, rack up these photo shoots. And initially, these photo shoots were, pretty tame and pretty wholesome. They'd be like, she'd be fully clothed in like, kind of like nature scenes and, flicking her hair around and looking back at the camera and this and that. And she'd show me and I'd be like, "Oh, babe, these are great. These look great." Then she started to do like lingerie kind of shoots, right? The clothes have come off. There's the bra and the pants, right? And that made the gut twist again, right? And I brought it up to her. I was like, these shoots, you're taking off more and more clothes in these shoots. What's going on? Is that the direction that you're going in? And they're artistic. It's called erotic. They're artistic, and she kind of shut me down on that. And I was like, oh, okay. So again, well-conditioned modern man, I repressed those gut feelings, right? But what I was beginning to feel there is my boundary being crossed, right? Then one day I came home, and what's weird about this is she had her own personal laptop, but my PC was hooked up to like the TV. So I turned on my PC and there was a new icon on the desktop and it was a JPEG. I could see it was a picture of her, right? And I clicked on it and there's this picture of her, right? She's it's a low camera angle, like looking up. She's just wearing this trench coat that's open and nothing else, right? So, you know, it's a downward angle so you can see it all, right? And she wasn't home at the time. And I waited till she came home and I was like, "Yo, what's this?" And she immediately got defensive, right? She was talking about how it was artistic, it's erotica or whatever she said. I can't remember, but it turned into an argument. And I said to her, "This is too far for me. I can't accept this." I was supportive of the modeling, but it's come to a point where it's reached a point where you're doing things that I cannot accept. And she kind of shouted me down on it, and she told me that this is what she was going to do, regardless of what I thought. And basically, I let my boundary go, and I didn't uphold it, and I stayed in the relationship. And if I remember correctly, we stayed together for probably another 6 months, if not longer. During this period, right, she formed this relationship with this older guy, and so we're what, 22, 21, 22 at the time. This guy is like late 40s, 50s. He's a photographer, right? And he starts taking it like around Europe. Like they went to like France, I think. I want to say they went to Germany and a few other locations, right? And I'm just like allowing this to happen. Um, and when I say allow, I don't mean that I had control over her and where she went, but I mean allowing it for myself, accepting the behavior, right? I'm just sat there at home accepting it. like, oh yeah, send a message when you can, babe. Good luck on the shoot. I remember one day as well finding like a box for a new MacBook under the bed, and I took it to her and I was like, "What's this?" And she was like, "Oh, such and such, the photographer, he bought it for me." And I just naively accepted it. And looking back, I'm pretty sure she was, stacking some paper and she bought it for herself. But whatever. Anyway, so after a few months, right, she's doing her thing, and to her credit, she's pursuing it, with passion and vigor. While meanwhile, I'm stagnating. I'm doing nothing for my own life to progress. One day, I can't remember how it happened. She told me she wanted to end things. And we had a little discussion about it, but it ended with me saying, "I want some space. I want you. I need some space." And she said, "I'm going to leave." So she left. She left the flat, and I spent the night just feeling just awful, right? And I had work the next day, but in the morning I called in because I was much more emotionally fragile as a 22-year-old boy. And so yeah, the next day she was expecting me to be at work, right? Meanwhile, I'm like licking my wounds in bed, and she comes in, right? I hear the door lock go. I hear her voice, and then I hear this male voice, and I'm like, oh God. So, what? She met that guy last night? No way. She had that guy lined up, right? She probably knew that guy for weeks, maybe months. And they were probably forming kind of like a, emotional connection while she was still with me. Um, and that's how things ended, right? I moved back home that day. The point of this story is that I allowed my boundary to be crossed, and it resulted in her losing respect for me. There were other reasons why she lost respect, because, like as I said, I wasn't progressing in life at all. I was kind of stuck in place. But the fact is that if I'd upheld that boundary, at least that would have afforded me the respect from her to say that this is a man with standards who is not willing to accept things that go against what he wants for himself, and he's willing to walk if I persist, right? So I think in that, I'm going to give myself a bit of grace, and I'm going to say in that situation that it was a bit nebulous, like where the line should be drawn, because what am I going to say? Don't pursue a career in modeling. But there was a point where the clothes were coming off, and it made my gut twist, where I should have said, this is a line for me, right? And if it's something that you want to pursue, I can't stick around for it, right? But I didn't do that. I suppressed it. I erased that line, and I began to erase myself until I was, nothing. And then she left, because that's what happens. Because when there's no boundaries, no structure, no presence, there's nothing for a woman to connect with. And so the connection was gone, and she left. So learn from me, bros. Have those boundaries in place. Be aware of what you're willing to accept and what is a hard no for you, and uphold those, right? Because it's good for you and it's good for the woman that you're with. So that's all I have to say about boundaries. Thanks for checking in. I hope this helped. Love you.